The strongest people aren't angry. They're finished caring. Anger is loud. Pain is noisy. But real power is quiet. Because when someone stops caring about being understood, liked, or saved, they become impossible to control. Pause. Let silence hit. Then we go in. Listen carefully. Most people think strength looks like rage. They think power is shouting. They think dominance is aggression. It's not. That's weakness trying to look intimidating. The strongest people you'll ever meet don't raise their voice. They don't explain themselves. They don't react. They've already learned the truth. Caring too much is what kept them weak. Caring what people thought. Caring who stayed. Caring who left. Caring who understood. Caring who believed. Every ounce of care they gave away made them lighter, hollower, easier to break. So one day, something snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. They didn't get angry, they got done. Done hoping people would change. Done expecting fairness. Done believing effort guaranteed reward. Done thinking the world owed them decency. And the moment they stopped caring, they started seeing clearly. They saw how people move, how loyalty expires, how support disappears the second you struggle, how respect only comes after results. That's when the shift happened. They didn't become cruel, they became controlled. They stopped reacting emotionally and started acting intentionally. No more explaining pain, no more justifying silence, no more bleeding in front of people who enjoy watching. They learned something dangerous. The world doesn't respond to emotion, it responds to composure. So they learned to be calm while everything burned. And that calm terrified people more than anger ever could. Because anger begs to be noticed. Calm doesn't need permission. Anger leaks weakness. Calm hides strength. That's when they stopped asking for peace and started becoming it. Cold, steady, unbothered. Not because they didn't feel anything, but because they decided feelings would no longer control their actions. And once that decision is made, you don't break anymore. You adapt. You don't react. You calculate. You don't care who doubts you. You care what you're building. That's where real power begins. You don't wake up like this overnight. You don't become calm because life treated you gently. You become calm because chaos exhausted you. At first, you cared. You tried explaining yourself. You tried being patient. You tried being good. And every time you did, the world took more. People misunderstood you, used your effort, ignored your pain, tested how much you could tolerate. And slowly, something changed. You stopped reacting, not because you were weak, but because reacting was pointless. Anger wastes energy. Explaining invites disrespect. Begging confirms inferiority. So you learn silence. You realize something dangerous. The world doesn't respond to emotion. It responds to control. The loud ones burn out. The angry ones expose themselves. The emotional ones get predictable. But the calm ones, they become unreadable. You stop raising your voice. You stop proving your worth. You stop chasing understanding. Not because you gave up, but because you outgrew the need. That's when people start feeling uncomfortable around you, because they can't read you anymore. They can't provoke you. They can't manipulate you. Your calm becomes pressure. You're no longer reacting to life. Life starts adjusting to you. And here's the truth most people never accept. Caring too much is what keeps you weak. Caring about opinions, caring about validation, caring about being liked. Those things make you hesitate. They slow you down. They give others leverage over you. So you let them go. Not with anger, with clarity. You stop asking, is this fair? You start asking, is this effective? You stop thinking, what will they think? You start thinking, What needs to be done? That shift changes everything. You move differently. You decide faster. You don't second guess. And people feel it. They won't say it out loud, but they feel it. That something about you is heavier now, sharper, more grounded. You're not aggressive. You're settled. You don't need to threaten. Your presence already answers the question. This is what elite calm looks like. Not peace, not happiness. Finality. You've already accepted the worst. You've already let go. You've already stopped hoping the world will be kind, and that's why nothing shakes you anymore. This is the phase where weak people quit caring about their goals, but strong people quit caring about distractions. And once that happens, you don't break, you don't fold, you don't flinch, you move. There's a moment that changes everything. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It doesn't look like a breakdown. It's quieter than that. It's the moment you realize that caring the way you used to is the reason you kept bleeding. You cared about being understood. You cared about being fair. You cared about giving people chances. You cared about explaining yourself. And every time you did, you paid for it. Not because you were wrong, but because the world doesn't reward softness the way you were taught it would. You don't become strong by being cruel. You become strong by being selective, by understanding that not every emotion deserves expression. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every person deserves access to you. Most people stay weak because they leak energy everywhere. They react to everything. They absorb every opinion. They feel everything deeply and control nothing. That's not depth, that's exposure. And exposure gets you hurt. The strongest people you've ever met didn't stop caring because they were heartless. They stopped caring because they learned. They learned that emotion without control is a weakness others can pull on. They learned that reacting gives power away. They learned that silence unsettles people more than anger ever could. So they closed the door. Not on ambition, not on discipline, not on purpose. They closed the door on noise. They stopped needing validation, stopped chasing fairness, stopped expecting people to play by rules they never agreed to. And that's when they changed. Because once you stop caring about being liked, you start caring about being precise. Once you stop caring about being understood, you start caring about being effective. Once you stop caring about explaining yourself, you start building results that don't need explanation. This isn't about becoming empty. It's about becoming contained. You still feel, you just don't leak. You still think, you just don't announce. You still want, you just don't beg. That's the shift. Weak people express everything they feel. Strong people decide what gets to move them. And once you understand that, once you really understand it, you stop fighting the world. You start mastering yourself. At some point, you stop asking why it happened to you. Not because you got answers, but because you don't need them anymore. That's the shift. Most people stay trapped asking why. Why did they betray me? Why did I fail? Why didn't they help? Why wasn't I enough? Those questions keep you weak, because they keep you tied to the past. But strength begins when you stop asking why and start asking, what now? What do I do with this pain? What do I build from this loss? What version of me survives this? Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. You stop romanticizing suffering. You stop explaining yourself. You stop wasting energy on people who already showed you who they are. You don't hate them. You don't chase closure. You don't seek revenge with words. You just move on, silently. And that silence terrifies people more than rage ever could. Because rage is loud. Rage is predictable. Rage burns out. But detachment? Detachment is controlled. Detached people don't react. They decide. You start choosing your actions without emotion hijacking your mind. You pause instead of exploding.
You observe instead of arguing. You calculate instead of venting. And suddenly, the world feels slower. People rush. People panic. People overshare. You don't. You begin to realize something uncomfortable but freeing. Most people aren't your enemy. They're just noise. And noise doesn't deserve your energy. So you cut it off. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. You stop replying immediately. You stop proving yourself. You stop needing to be understood. Because the strongest people don't need validation. They have direction. This is where discipline replaces emotion. This is where consistency replaces motivation. This is where results replace excuses. You don't need to feel confident to move. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel anything at all. You move because it's necessary. That's the kind of calm that feels threatening, the kind of stillness that makes others uneasy. Because when someone can't read you, they can't control you. And once you understand that, you stop caring how you're perceived. You care about execution. This is where you become efficient. This is where wasted effort disappears. This is where life becomes simple. Train, build, improve, repeat. No speeches, no announcements, no emotional chaos, just progress. And the best part? You don't need the world to notice you anymore, because you already know. The strongest people aren't angry. They're finished caring.
At some point, something snaps inside you. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. You realize how much energy you wasted trying to explain yourself to people who never wanted to understand you in the first place. You replay conversations in your head. You remember defending your choices, your silence, your discipline, your distance. And suddenly it hits you. They weren't confused. They were threatened. Threatened by your restraint. Threatened by your focus. Threatened by the fact that you didn't need the same noise they survived on. That's when you stop explaining. Because explanation is a weakness disguised as politeness. You don't owe clarity to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe transparency to people who only look for leverage. You don't owe warmth to people who benefit from your confusion. So you go quiet, not because you're angry, not because you're hurt, but because you've learned something vital. The more you explain, the more control you give away. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is position. When you stop narrating your life, you start living it on your terms. You stop announcing plans. You stop sharing progress. You stop seeking reactions. You move without witnesses. And that's when your power multiplies. Because people can only interfere with what they can see. When they don't know your next move, they can't sabotage it. When they don't know your goals, they can't poison them. When they don't know your thoughts, they can't manipulate them. You become unreadable. And unreadable people are dangerous. This is where discipline stops being about motivation and starts being about identity. You don't wake up asking how you feel. You wake up knowing what must be done. You don't negotiate with your mood. You don't romanticize your pain. You don't spiral into emotion. You execute. Because feelings change, principles don't. And the more you live by principle, the less the world can shake you. You stop reacting to disrespect. You stop chasing validation. You stop correcting people's opinions about you. Let them believe what they want. Beliefs don't stop results. You learn that most people talk to feel important. You work to become undeniable. You learn that most people explain their failures. You build past them. You learn that most people need to be seen. You need to be effective. That's the shift. You don't crave applause anymore. You crave progress. You don't want to be liked. You want to be lethal in your consistency. And yes, this makes people uncomfortable. They'll say you changed. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you're distant. They're right.
you did change. You changed from someone who needed approval into someone who needs results. From someone who explained into someone who acts. From someone who cared too much into someone who cares only about what matters. This is the phase where loneliness sharpens you instead of breaking you. Because you finally understand. Most people aren't meant to walk with you long term. They're meant to watch from a distance. And that's fine. You weren't built for crowds. You were built for precision. And from here on, every step you take is quieter, heavier, more intentional. You don't rush. You don't flinch. You don't react. You just move. You don't need closure. You don't need apologies. You don't need explanations. Because the truth is simple. People didn't hurt you by accident. They chose convenience over loyalty. They chose comfort over integrity. They chose themselves. And once you see that clearly, something inside you shuts off. You stop replaying conversations. You stop asking why. You stop hoping they'll understand what they did. Not because you forgave them, but because you're done wasting energy on people who already showed you who they are. This is where power actually begins. Weak people need answers. Strong people adjust. You stop confronting. You stop announcing boundaries. You stop giving warnings. You just move differently. You become selective. You become quiet. You become precise. Not cold for attention, cold for efficiency. You understand that emotion is expensive. It costs focus. It costs timing. It costs clarity. And you've already paid enough. So now you can serve. You don't react to disrespect. You don't argue with ignorance. You don't chase people who drift. You let distance do the talking. Because silence exposes everything. It exposes who only liked you when you were useful. It exposes who needed access to feel powerful. It exposes who disappears the moment you stop overgiving. And instead of feeling betrayed, you feel relieved. Relieved that you saw it early. Relieved that you didn't waste a lifetime trying to save people who were never loyal. Relieved that you no longer have to pretend. This is where you become dangerous. Not loud, not aggressive, not dramatic. Dangerous because you are no longer predictable. You don't seek approval. You don't explain your moves. You don't announce your plans. You operate in private. You build when no one is watching. You train when no one is clapping. You sharpen your mind when others are numbing theirs. And here's the part most people don't understand. This isn't loneliness. This is separation. Loneliness is craving people. Separation is choosing purpose. You didn't lose everyone. You outgrew them. And growth is always quiet. When trees grow, you don't hear it. When bones heal, you don't feel it working. When discipline builds, there's no applause. But one day, the strength is there. And people don't know when it happened. They just know they can't move you anymore. You don't flinch at pressure. You don't panic in chaos. You don't collapse when things go wrong. Because you've already survived worse in silence. You've learned to sit with discomfort. You've learned to think instead of react. You've learned that control beats intensity every time. That's why your calm scares people now. Because calm means you're not acting on impulse. Calm means you've already decided. Calm means whatever you do next is intentional. You don't threaten. You don't warn. You don't talk. You execute. And the world starts treating you differently. Not because you demanded respect, but because people can feel when someone is no longer emotionally available to be manipulated. They feel it in your eyes, in your pauses, in how little you say. You don't chase power, you embody it. And once you reach this stage, there's no going back. Because you finally understand the truth. Caring too much made you weak. Letting go made you lethal.
You stop trying to be understood. Not because you're angry, not because you're bitter, but because you finally realize explaining yourself is a waste of energy. Weak people explain. Strong people execute. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your pain. You don't owe anyone a story about why you're quiet now. You don't owe anyone context for your discipline, your distance, your change. The moment you start explaining, you give away control. Because explanation invites debate. Debate invites doubt. And doubt slows you down. So you stop talking. You let people misunderstand you. You let them create their own stories. You let them assume you're cold, distant, arrogant, broken. Let them. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is compression. It's pressure building under the surface. You learn something important here. Most people don't want to understand you. They want to measure themselves against you. And when they can't read you, they get uncomfortable. When they can't predict you, they get nervous. When they can't control the narrative, they get loud. That's power shifting. You move differently now. You don't announce plans. You don't warn anyone. You don't ask permission. You let results speak in a language nobody can argue with. And here's the truth most people never accept. Being misunderstood is the price of becoming dangerous. If everyone understands you, you're still predictable. If everyone supports you, you're still dependent. If everyone agrees with you, you're still playing small. Growth isolates. Clarity separates. Discipline distances. That's not a flaw. That's the process. You start trusting actions over words, patterns over promises, consistency over emotion. You stop reacting to disrespect because reaction feeds it. You stop correcting assumptions because truth doesn't need defense. You don't need them to see you coming. You need them to feel you when you arrive. This is where calm becomes intimidating. Not loud confidence, not aggressive energy. Stillness. The kind that makes people wonder what you know that they don't. The kind that makes rooms feel smaller. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't chase, doesn't flinch. You finished explaining. Now you're building. And the most unsettling part for them? They won't know how far you've gone until it's already too late. This isn't arrogance. This isn't ego. This is what happens when someone stops needing validation and starts trusting their own direction. You don't speak much anymore because you're busy becoming something words can't contain. Here's the truth most people never reach. The strongest people aren't angry. They're finished caring. Not because they're broken, not because they're empty, but because they've learned. You don't get to this point by choice. You get here after being disappointed too many times, after expecting support that never came, after explaining yourself to people who never listened, after giving effort where it was never matched. At some point, something inside you shuts off. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. You stop reacting. You stop proving. You stop chasing validation like it's oxygen. And that's when people start feeling uncomfortable around you. Because calm is terrifying to those who live off emotion. Silence is threatening to those who survive on noise. Control exposes chaos. You don't argue anymore. You don't raise your voice. You don't announce your plans. You just move. And that's what separates you now. You understand that caring too much was never strength. It was leverage handed to the wrong people. It was energy wasted on outcomes you couldn't control. So you took it back. You became selective, cold with intention, detached with purpose. Not numb, not heartless, disciplined. You still feel pain. You just don't let it drive. You still get hit. You just don't flinch. You learned that rage burns fast, but calm endures. Angry people exhaust themselves trying to be heard. Finished people let results speak. That's the difference. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to flex. You don't need to explain what you're becoming. Your consistency already does. Every day you show up without applause. Every day you work without recognition. Every day you stay disciplined while others collapse emotionally. That's where real power is built. And here's the part nobody warns you about. This level of calm will cost you people. Some will say you've changed. Some will say you're cold. Some will say you've lost your spark. Let them. They were comfortable with the version of you that reacted. They benefited from the version of you that cared too much. They don't recognize the version of you that's done bleeding. You didn't lose empathy. You learned boundaries. You didn't lose emotion. You learned control. You didn't become heartless. You became precise. And precision is dangerous, because now nothing can bait you. Nothing can rush you. Nothing can derail you emotionally. You don't chase revenge. You build distance. You don't seek closure. You seek progress. You don't hope people change. You adapt faster than they expect. That's why your presence feels different now. You walk slower. You speak less. You listen more. Not because you're unsure, because you already know. And when you decide to move, it's final. No drama, no announcement, no hesitation, just execution. This is what happens when someone survives long enough to understand the game. Not everyone deserves access. Not everything deserves reaction. Not every battle deserves energy. You learned when to stay silent, when to disengage, when to let people underestimate you. Because the strongest position isn't being loud, it's being inevitable. So if you're here right now, feeling disconnected, quieter than before, less reactive than you used to be, good. That's not weakness, that's evolution. You didn't lose your fire, you learned how to contain it. And contained fire doesn't burn out, it destroys everything it's aimed at. Stay calm, stay controlled, stay cold. Not because the world hurt you, but because you finally understood it.